Yeah, I wanted to combine an article I wrote a few years ago um, with some modern technology and speech. Okay, this week I wanted to take a little bit different approach to my podcast, spurred a little by my conversation with a U.S. Marshal, and also I wanted to give some, I guess, anecdotal evidence of my personality change, going from more of an introvert to an extrovert. Um, it can be found a lot in my writings, and this happened on LinkedIn articles. And I've written, I don't know, between 150 200 articles. And a lot of those talked about racism in Harrison. And I go back to the time growing up in Harrison and then being there in the roaring 60s, I guess, when a lot of entrepreneurs had developed businesses and it was just kind of a mecca of for people to start a business and grow a business. And I've alluded to that as my dad being a pioneer in television sales, and his friend Bob Wheeler starting a cable business, radio station, and then even dabbling into TV broadcasts. But there were a lot of others, and you can see that in Garrison and FedEx, and you just look around and you'll see a lot of examples of that. Unfortunately, over the last few years, it's changed considerably. It's more of a blue collar community. I found that even in the home I own, when we moved out to the golf course, and then we've had a couple of moves, or at least since then, before moving to Little Rock, that we were kind of in a sweet spot of between $150,000 and $300,000. But I also know people that have had properties over $300,000 that have taken a major hit. Now, they've remained pretty quiet about the issues, and I'm talking about the racism issues, but I wanted to go back and kind of give my take on it and what I found, and why some of it was self-inflicted, but no one really took a battle against the AP and some of the other major news sources that just got it wrong. Wikipedia had it wrong. The SPLC, and they're the kind of the people that determine whether you're a racist community or not. And that's a Southern Poverty law down in Alabama. I even talked to their general counsel and their their board chairman. So I went to the top, and I found out that really the main reason that Harrison kept that name as being the most racist, which was unfair, was because the community was afraid or just not willing to take action against the Robb family. And I'll point that out. There was actually a member of the chamber that was providing tax and investment, and it's on public record in the state of Arkansas. I pointed that out to some people at the chamber, and at first they tried to sidestep it and tried to do things to negate that. And I had communications with the owner of the business, and he threatened to sue me. And again, you'll see that if you read my articles, that it was pretty much ignored. And the reasons for that is that some of the top community leaders were making money in real estate and banking and other things, whether it's a loan to a car repair business or some other thing. You'll see that they had an opportunity to make money, and they didn't really question it. And then you'll find later on there was an ego battle between former Mayor Jeff Crockett and Thomas Robb, where they got kind of in a kind of a pissing contest where it just went back and forth. But the 11, I guess, areas of hate or things that kind of elevated Harrison to be the most racist community in the country, and that was about 2015, was should have been avoided, and that's why I've written quite a bit of things on this. And now, as a podcast, I just wanted to go back through some of the details, and again, it's a little bit different, but I wanted to show when you get locked in on something that your personality changes. And again, I had personal gain other than just the pride of the community and what I knew growing up, and my dad's businesses, my uncle's business. He was in the oil business here, and just others that I knew well, that I said, man, this is enough, and I kept seeing a lot of crazy things coming out on the state level and other national levels that tried to give credibility. So I hope you understand this, but it kind of gives you a little more understanding of Parkinson's impact on an individual's personality. You can always go to my LinkedIn articles. They're time-stamped, and you can see how this information developed over about a 4 or 5 year period. So that's the following has a YouTube video on a description of what an extrovert is, and I wanted to use that because some of the things I've done in writing articles over the last few years, it's being unplugged, and I wanted to make sure that people understood that the articles I wrote are very important to the Harrison community, but for whatever reason, because of the intertwined relationship of the Klan and the location of the Klan and how it interacts with and has in the past with members of the chamber and maybe the mayor and his office, and somewhat the same with the county judge and his people that's on the quorum court. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. When I started talking with a U.S. Marshal and our plans in the future to do a podcast, we will probably explore those to a little different level, but I think people who have taken the time to read the articles and may want to go back through the audio version will have a better understanding. And artificial intelligence to talk about situations that have changed within my personality, and I alluded to this in a podcast with Sidney Moncrief that you suddenly become an extrovert, and there are some people that are kind of the old friends and family, and they can't accept that, and then new friends really like that. That's one of the reasons I found it in Rocksteady Boxing. I was with a person that I'd known for many years. He said 40 years, and then he said he really didn't really know me until the last 2 years in Rocksteady Boxing. And there are going to be others that I point to in that I had a new beginning with. But the other funny part of this is, on occasion I've gone down to walk-ons, which is similar to buckets in Harrison, but the idea there was to meet people. The other evening I ran into Wally Hall, who I'd known in the past, but he wanted to introduce me to, or reintroduce me to a good friend from Harrison, and it was Sandy Stroop, who I remembered had a boating business and come down to work for Governor Asa Hutchinson. But after that, I met a U.S. Marshal
and we were, befriended in the sense that we talked about the fact that I once worked for the CIA, and of course he had a lot of interesting stories of assisting with, I guess, the Supreme Court nominees, particularly Kavanaugh, and all the circumstances that he had to do in the 24/7 type coverage before he was, I guess, voted on and accepted as Supreme Court Justice. But we got into a lot of other stories, and of course one of the things I talked about was a little bit about the complexity of Harrison and racism, and he said, well, Harrison's in his area, which I said, well, maybe we can have a podcast and kind of further develop our relationship. And then I wanted to kind of rehash some things that I've written about in the past. I think it's important to give an update. And again, sometimes when you write articles like this and you write it independently, some people think you're unplugged, and of course, why do you keep bringing up a subject? But again, the Klan has an office downtown, and it's in the state of Arkansas, if you want to look that up. And it also is located in between where the old city hall was and the county government. Well, if you got zero tolerance in a community, why is that still there? Okay, the following I am using Speechify to give you the audio version of an article I wrote about two multi-billionaires and why they chose Harrison and the Harrison area. So enjoy that.
Harrison has been called a hellhole, citizens labeled semantically unsophisticated denizens, whatever. The most racist town in America, a shame of a town, and good people should avoid at all costs. Don't move to Harrison, don't work in Harrison, don't support any business in Harrison. Boycott anything and everything that comes out of that nasty racist hellhole. The rural economy has been moribund since the 1980s. Perhaps these folks should start to consider getting an education and moving to a more metropolitan area in search of work, rather than hope Trump can somehow roll back the calendar, adapt and evolve, or go the way of the dinosaurs. More about this later in my discussion on the new economy, remote jobs, and online education that are being created by the coronavirus. Sampling of Washington Post reader comments on viral video BLM article. So why did two multi-billionaires choose Harrison? Sam Walton personally picked Harrison for his second Walmart. I have argued unsuccessfully so far with Wikipedia that story was much more impactful than the 1-900-509 riots where no one got killed. It got so heated that I was suspended as an editor. Walmart Store 2 was my go-to marketing story when I was selling cable TV software systems internationally. HTTPS site s.google.com/site/current/home. Every business executive from Buenos Aires to Beijing understood it. Sam Walton and even analysts believe that without the success of the Harrison store, there would not be a Walmart company today. One of my two support references that I supplied Wikipedia, mine were much better than their riot references. Click on encyclopedia.com link below and skip to Harrison, Arkansas under Walton Samuel Moore. The reason Sam drove that old truck and wore the ball cap was so he could be more approachable to his people. One of the ways he fostered trust. He always took time to get to know the people, associates on his team. He would take a knee in the stores and listen to what people had to say. He asked the team for answers because he believed in them. He said a servant leader can often get more out of a team than the members ever thought possible. Many remember seeing Mr. Sam carrying a yellow tablet to capture details. What's remembered most is Walton's eagerness to get to know each one of them on a personal level. One of the first Harrison employees was Grace McCutcheon, pictured above. Grace would tell Sam what customers were looking for. Grace, my wife's aunt, pictured above, was one of several local employees paid minimum wage and provided a profit-sharing program. Many became wealthy and even millionaires. Grace read a poem at Sam Walton's funeral. Without Harrison's success, there would have been no other stores. Bill Lovell said, "I've heard Mr. Sam say it many times. If it hadn't been for the success of the Harrison store, there wouldn't be a Walmart chain like there is today. Johnny Morris. So it's nice to see another multi-billionaire. Johnny Morris is choosing Harrison area with the Dogpatch acquisition. In his news release, he called area a crown jewel of Arkansas. The Dogpatch was becoming a time-lapse representation of the direction Harrison has been trending. Time for Harrison to get his mojo back. I had the experience of living here when there were several active entrepreneurs and power brokers. I have referred to those days as a castle and moat. Due to its remoteness, aloofness, and self-sufficiency, Johnny Morris's hands-on style will force an attitude adjustment. Both Morris and Walton are known for getting to the detail level. Some might even call it micromanaging. My wife, selection influenced by Johnny's wife, managed the Big Cedar gift shop buying, and she can confirm Morris on his regular visits was very detailed. He knew what was selling and not selling and stayed on top of guest feedback. The latest hot national gift shop ideas were secondary to what his guests wanted. One of America's best employers and one of America's most reputable companies. His legendary attention to detail comes from staying connected with what's happening on the ground. I read letters from customers and talk with our team members, spending as much time as I can visiting our stores and visiting with our people, says Morris. The best ideas tend to happen when we're closest to our customers and the team members who serve them, not sitting around boardrooms. Morris believes in the importance of building relationships. He has seen firsthand the power of working together toward a common goal. This was the inspiration behind the creation of the Johnny Morris Wonders of Wildlife Foundation, the most powerful alliance of today's leading conservation leaders, and the most significant movement in the last 100 years. Morris recognizes the contributions we have made as individuals as strong, but when we all work together, we can do more, reach more, make an even greater impact.
Time for action based on details. Words not enough. Lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Year of discovery. Over the past year, I've done extensive research on the financial impact of Harrison's racist image. My research approach was not to assume anything and question everything, including how the experts arrived at their conclusions. Significant differences from others who have attempted to solve racist image in past relying on perceptions and hindered by committee decisions. I was motivated by AP News, Wikipedia, Google, YouTube, and other media's negative racial slant financial impact on Harrison. How much is self-inflicted and how much is created by the media with an intentional bias? Disclaimer, I have made it clear from the beginning that my research was self-funded and independent. After thorough research, I'm tired of hearing we need to apologize for our history on racism, including 1,900 and 509 riots. No one was killed. Unfortunate, but white families were run off too. It was Wild West law around the 1900s when jobs disappeared due to the railroad bankruptcy. Addendum number 4 and hashtag 6, this was explained in detail in my article. What happens when all things are not considered? NPR and PBS https www.linkedin.com/pulse/what happens when all things considered Blair / how the aggressive black railroad employees with no jobs compromised passive blacks came with transplanted slave owners for food and shelter. Another person who grew up in Vienna, Illinois, I have heard in 1954. The year that I was born, a black man raped a white woman, and they burned out all the blacks in town. There was a segregated area where the blacks lived called Nigger Hill. In 1906, white residents of Cotter, Baxter County, expelled all of the Owens African American population, save for a single family of 3 people on August 24, 1906. White residents served notice that all African Americans were to leave town immediately. 1960, census recorded no African Americans in Baxter County, Mountain Home County seat. Unfortunately, 8 and 9-year-olds are being killed in Chicago weekly. Check history map above of sundown cities and communities in New England, Boston, Chicago, and even California, as well as other sundown towns in the United States. Not limited to South. There were many more sophisticated communities where blacks weren't allowed to live, and it's been buried in their history without apologies. Might check North Arkansas and southern Missouri cities. You'll find all cities today have a low percentage of blacks. They had riots, were noted sundown cities, but have experienced different levels of Latino diversification. There were no plantations in North Arkansas as well. Much of the area was isolated. Lakes and dams happened around the 1950s, and later Buffalo River became a national river, creating tourism. Addendum number 5 for details. My wife and I did a project on African American cemeteries in the Harrison area for the Arkansas Humanities Council. There weren't any major industries other than timber. Area invested heavily in a railroad for timber business, which unfortunately was bankrupt before it could get started. Many of the blacks came to area because of the railroad or brought by families who once had plantations. The majority of the blacks were described as well-paid, hard workers who overstayed their welcome when jobs and money disappeared. Whites without work went to Missouri. With the physical description of the railroad workers, it's not likely they were passive when jobs disappeared. Personal and property risks were high for longtime natives. There was a recorded break-in of a home and arrest, resulting in a black being tried. See Addendum 6. Again, soil was hardscrabble and people weren't paying for ancillary services that they could get from families and friends. Time to drop the perceptions as unique to Harrison and look at the facts. I have owned a company with 100% local customers and another with 100% not local. I have a perspective supported by financial facts that very few others living in Harrison area have. My wife and I did research, mainly Sandy, on where the blacks were buried. Copies were provided to local libraries and schools circa 2010. Narrative can be found at Addendum. It was funded by a grant from the Arkansas Humanities Council. State of Arkansas. University of Arkansas and UALR professors assisted with our research, including visits to locations and interviews. Again, my information is real, not from perceptions or anecdotal secondhand, and not one-sided research. How the area was conflicted and why remembrances have become slanted. The history of shadows has much more accuracy and balance in the information. I debated November 2019 with Jacqueline Froelich, senior news producer, QAF Public Radio 91.3 FM HTTP, KUAF.com/station-based correspondent for NPR HTTP, www.npr.org/ an article below. National Public Radio has called on Jacqueline Froelich. As their expert, much like mainstream media, AP has used Heidi Beirich, director of the Intelligence Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center, as theirs. Total Eclipse, the destruction of the African American community of Harrison, Arkansas in 1905 and 1909, Jacqueline Froelich and David Zimmerman called it an ethnic cleansing. Really, and no one killed? Never a mention of blacks in adjoining Newton County before, during, or after the 1905-09 riots by Froelich. Yet in 1860, there were 378 black slaves scattered throughout the Buffalo River watershed and its immediate area. Over the years, many successful Harrison businesses have Newton County ties. A lot of good social skills for people coexisting. Coincidentally, dog patches in Newton County. Excerpt. Arkansas seceded from the Union and became a Confederate state on May 5, 1861. About 80% of the Arkansas men fought for the Confederacy, while 20% fought for the Union. In Newton County, the percentage was nearly reversed, with a reported 75% of the men enlisted for the Union side. Our findings were very enlightening. There appeared to be a communal interdependence in the mid to late 1800s that overrode social prejudices. In that regard, Newton County isolated communal living was the reverse of the social conflicts that were the norm in that time period. As stated in book, 3 decades of settlement had rapidly transformed the Buffalo Valley from wilderness to community and cultural landscape, a place settled by many folks within a short span of time. A relatively prosperous valley blessed with fertile farmland and imbued with an elaborate kinship structure, where most everybody was related by blood or marriage to everybody else. The very isolation of the valley fostered in its early settlers and their descendants an admirable degree of self-sufficiency, as well as a communal interdependence. An isolated, fiercely independent people, they differed throughout the southern Appalachian Mountains. Because they operated small, relatively autonomous farms, the average in 1850 was 28 improved acres per farm, and did not concentrate on a single cash crop. They had little need for slaves. Yet in 1860 there were 378 black slaves scattered throughout the Buffalo River watershed and its immediate area. The black population within the 3 county regions, while it consisted largely of slaves, also contained a significant proportion of free blacks. The region, and least of all the valley, had no economic ties to the greater South. Its inhabitants were little affected by the social, economic, and political forces beyond the confines of their little valley, but those forces were shaping a civil war and all. Men, women, and children were to be drawn into the vortex of that building storm. There was no legacy of hate based on slavery in the Harrison area. There appeared to be a communal interdependence in the mid to late 1800s that overrode social prejudices. Recently, I was asked by an investigative reporter, Herb, for somebody who is not deeply familiar with Dogpatch like me, how much would Johnny Morris doing a major project there affect Harrison proper, in your view? My response: I provided Computer Service Bureau accounting services to Dogpatch. There was an expensive royalty deal made with cartoonist Al Capp, who did nothing to market nationally. Unlike Silver Dollar City, it had no leader, several businessmen, and one realtor. Most wanted their return on investment and didn't want to reinvest. It was a hodgepodge that became amusement ride oriented, sold to Jess Odom, who was a successful property developer in Maumelle, and later to Magic Springs owner in Hot Springs. Theme park is not an option. In the past, it provided minimum wage jobs for 300 or so employees in summer. There was an attempt to go year-round with an ice skating rink and skiing. That failed. Hard to get there in bad weather. There was a nice convention center and a popular bar. Proximity to Buffalo National River is key. Ashley known for fishing and floating trips, hiking and horseback rides. Similarities to Big Cedar location to Table Rock Lake, the river is key. No doubt there could be rental lodges like Big Cedar, and nice restaurants, so several support services, construction, labor, supplies, plumbing, electrical, internet appliances would require knowing how Hollister Branson was impacted, but expect it to be significant. There are several people from Harrison who work at Big Cedar and Branson, more skilled jobs closer to home. Harrison to Dogpatch less than 15 minutes, around 10 miles. Harrison to Top of the Rock about 30 minutes, around 25 miles. Harrison to Branson about 40 minutes and around 35 miles. With all that's going on with the coronavirus, could see something more interesting, smart city. I can see national communities sprouting up away from headquarters with all the social distancing restrictions. Also, we'll see new national education model being online, private, and public mixture done anywhere. A lot of companies may have to find creative ways to deal with new normal. Several companies have an indefinite schedule in returning to headquarters. I could see Johnny Morris on the cutting edge since it can be built around outdoor living. Washington Post reader comment, the rural economy has been moribund since the 1980s. Perhaps these folks should start to consider getting an education and moving to a more metropolitan area in search of work. As mentioned above, due to the coronavirus, there will be major changes in jobs and education. Rural economies will be affected. His management style might be most impactful in Harrison than anything, more action than words. Reporter Herb, thank you for these background comments. I took the liberty of sharing your note internally with my boss, the editor-in-chief, as I imagine the Dogpatch Johnny Morris acquisition will be an ongoing story, and it's good for us to hear thoughts from outside our walls. Strategy and action items. Also, check out a couple of articles in Addendum 5 by Mike Masterson. Mike does a great job capturing the recent activities. Over the years, we have connected when faced with similar false issues about racism in Harrison, mainly generated by the Klan and a gullible media, social and mainstream. Unfortunately, there seems to always be a big push to raise money for rebranding Harrison by those willing to accept perceptions. My research purpose has been to find and fix root cause. Mike's articles, A Hit Job, and Harrison Haters. I pulled some excerpts from Mayor Jerry Jackson and Chamber CEO Bob Largent's releases to the media. The complete releases are in the addendum. A lot of buzzwords and call for action. I've written 35 fact-supported articles on this over the past year, starting with a strong local positive bias to Harrison, but concluding with Klan has to go. I am perplexed with the lack of details and specific action items at this stage by the leadership. One of the reasons I wanted to look at the management style of Sam Walton and Johnny Morris and their legendary attention to detail and their abilities to take action on facts. I've seen the Bill Murray Groundhog Day movie too many times. From Chamber article and Mayor's news release, they don't represent our community. Time to show with our actions. We must recognize our own bias and understand that we may be blind to its presence. This acknowledgement could be one of the first steps to healing and becoming a united community. I released a joint statement denouncing the video as unfairly representing Harrison and eroding decades of work to overcome our past racist reputation. I believe this was nothing less than a professional hit job. Our opinion became clear. Rob Bliss and a partner, both from Los Angeles, are professional agitators who saw an opportunity to exploit Harrison. If you doubt this, I challenge you to do your own investigation. The words of the people in the video were way beyond horrible and cannot be justified. Those individuals should be ashamed of themselves. However, it is important to know that Bliss and partners spent at least 3 days in Harrison on a very busy street and in front of a very busy Walmart. Quinn Foster, organizer of the local Black Lives Matter protests, denounces Rob Bliss as a profiteer out to make money from a movement in which he has no real interest. Visit the Facebook page of Ozark Hate Watch for more information. The fact that the Ku Klux Klan and leader have settled in nearby Zinc, Arkansas, and that a few supporters have rented billboards to display their hateful message has only added to Harrison's undeserved notoriety. Our Race Relations Task Force has worked to successfully remove 4 of the 5 privately owned billboards. They continue trying to remove the last one. Neither Bliss nor the media has contacted our task force or our Black Lives Matter group for comments or insight into the true nature of the majority of people in Harrison. This is one of the most devastating things that I have been through as mayor, and there have been many. I know that when we are attacked, our community can come together to fight this. We must pray that we can move beyond this and become a better community because of it. I urge you to combat hateful comments with something good. Your opinion is powerful. Please respectfully stand up for our town whenever you get the chance. Obvious action items. Find out who contacted Rob Bliss about trip to Harrison and facilitated his visit. Who did he have contact with while in Harrison? Where he stayed, ate, and talked to? Accusations should be supported with documented facts. Quinn Foster, organizer of the local Black Lives Matter protests, announces Rob Bliss is a profiteer out to make money from a movement in which he has no real interest. This took all the air out of the BLM Zinc protest march. Couldn't have made Foster happy with all the time spent on organizing the rally. Foster and BLM should be interested in providing reason he said Bliss was a profiteer and who encouraged him to come. Foster must know something. It appears Rob Bliss set up on Walmart's private parking lot without getting their approval. Walmart ethics should have interest since customers were videoed and likely distributed without its customers' knowledge and approval. Bliss is a professional. In his other videos, he blurred faces when he lacked approval, for example, Manhattan. For Walmart to allow it to happen can be a legal financial problem for them as well, taking. Action against a professional is important to avoid similar actions being taken at other Walmarts as well as Harrison again. I have contacted Walmart ethics, but local official follow-up important for action. Bo Jenkins was ID'd on video and Washington Post comments, so need to document how he became involved in video, verify what he saw, was asked or told, and what he said. Was he aware he was being recorded and was shown, if that's him, on a viral video with 4 million views, identifying and taking action only way to convince people, those that live here and others, that Harrison is serious about racism. Anybody who is ID'd should be documented. Action has to be taken. I sent information to local leaders with no response. The most racist city was created by the Klan, specifically Tom Robb, in 2015. I have documented how easy it was for him to do it with the billboards by manipulating SPLC and leveraging his tabloid network. Particularly in the UK, mainstream news accepts it without doing any independent research. See addendum number 3. 2015 hate groups. August 25, 2019, Harrison was featured in an AP News byline distributed nationally and written by Andrew DeMillo, who resides in Little Rock. Andrew frequently asks Governor Hutchinson questions on the governor's daily update on the coronavirus. Title of article, Arkansas Home to Supremacist Groups Weighs Hate Crimes Law. The largest town, Harrison, population 13,000, was the site of riots in the early 1900s that drove out most of its black population. The Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, one of several Klan factions, and the white supremacist Kingdom Identity Ministries are based in the Harrison area. The Klan uses a Harrison post office box for its mailing address, while its national director lives a short drive outside town. Also quotes Heidi Barish, director of the Intelligence Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center, now a former employee, on white supremacist growth in the Harrison area. My complaints, along with others, got her fired. https:// Com Bay, seat 9849, DC Emperor 0, FC 43, 898, D753, 749 D, 30 service. Com seat, actually there was more damage from that than viral video because of source credibility, AP, and national byline. Klan General Counsel resides at the principal address of the Klan on West Stevenson and Harrison, and that address serves for dateline for news releases for Knights Party Committee, KU Klux. Klan. Why has that happened? Need zoning laws and a city and county law against hate crimes. VK, a Russian clone of Facebook used by white supremacists to post and communicate no matter how racially offensive or provocative their information is, after not being accepted by U.S. companies, used by Tom and Jason Robb, with potential interference by Russians in upcoming election time for Klan to go. Unfortunately, the Race Relations Task Force knew about the 11 Harrison area hate groups, but failed to pursue action. Written by Arkansas Democrat Gazette reporter Bill Bowden. Some call Harrison the most racist city in the nation. George Holcomb, the task force's secretary, wrote in his proposal to UALR. The Southern Poverty Law Center identifies 22 hate groups in Arkansas. Some of those 11 hate groups, such as KKK Radio, are entities affiliated with the Klan. 11 of those are headquartered in or near Harrison. Tourism could be affected and the city's economy could suffer.
Harrison considers itself the gateway to the Buffalo National River,
which is miles to the south and draws more than 1.5 million visitors a year. But the task force members don't act out of economic concerns so much as love for their hometown. Big mistake. See Addendum 3. Time for locals to quit patting each other on the back and take action. I was asked a good question recently. What would happen if I or him, white, took a Black Lives Matter sign, or a milder version, and stood around in the Walmart parking lot? My response was, I'm sure I would get a much better response than what Rob Bliss reported based on my mannerisms. More questions than anything, but again, I'm more interested in the cause than any organized movement. More like the statement below from FedEx Chairman and CEO Fred Smith. When you see inclusion of unequal treatment anywhere, I personally include the disabled. People who have been totally left out of the conversation. Note important update, Chamber denounces racism August 11th. 2020 Harrison Daily Times, request for important action. The board's action also formally requested the Boone County Quorum Court and Harrison City Council to do the same, as well as support legislation imposing enhanced sentencing for convictions associated with hate crimes. A proposed resolution for each body accompanied the Chamber's letter. Copy and addendum #Tagoni.
Okay, all the appendix references can be found in LinkedIn article, and I'm not going to have those included in this podcast for obvious reasons. There was a lot of talk, no action. I did want to include the one concerning Newton County and how many leaders in Harrison came from Newton County and had the same, characteristics and mannerism and leadership as was developed in Newton County. So I think that's important. Okay, Speechify gets most everything right, but instead of villains, it is maligns. So remember, it's maligns.
Be born through the villain's bloodline, and they probably did not imagine that their lives would be studied by generations to come. One of the assets that the old grandpa and grandma villains chose to bring with them was a slave girl named Piety. She traveled with them and would become Grandma Villain's dearest friend and closest companion after the family settled into the hills of northwest Arkansas. Aunt Piety, as she has been through generations, was not only a companion, helper, and friend to the Villains family, she was also a mother to several children. Aunt Piety's oldest son, Timothy, or Tim Villains, was a big, strong, friendly man who helped those around him when they called. He lived in a cabin on a hill nestled in the shadows of the old oak, walnut, and hickory trees of Arkansas. He worked hard, loved much, and was indeed an intelligent and interesting man. He was married, they say, at least 3 times to white women and was often fined by the county judge who claimed to be able to stop a lynching for a few dollars. One story that folks love to tell involves Tim helping a neighbor with some small pigs. The sow became enraged and lunged at Tim, but she met a large, work-toughened fist that sent her reeling backward. I imagine the sow thought twice about attacking Tim again. Even people who came to the area looking for someone other than a Villains were amazed to learn that this big black man carried the name. Tim Villains lived in the shadows as a young boy through manhood and perhaps even in death. But from the shadows of history, many stories have been told. We must keep history alive by talking about those who have passed this way before. Perhaps in a different time, Tim Villains would have become a great man in worldly standards. In our minds, he was a great man just by being who he was. In our research, Tim Villains was referred to as Nigger Tim. At that time, it was not considered offensive, but today we know that it is. So he will be referenced as Tim or N. Tim in the rest of our narrative. Last fall, I traveled to Newton County in search of the graves of some of the first African Americans to be buried in these hills. What a wonderful day it was. I met Willard and Sally Villains at Fire Tower Road. My sister-in-law, Gwendola Tennyson, and I climbed into their blue Ford truck and took off down to Boxley Valley. Willard was so knowledgeable on all the valley history. After all, he and Sally have lived here all their lives and know all the oral history passed down from each generation. It was a perfect crisp fall day, leaves falling, scattered clouds, and temperature close to 50 degrees. We talked as fast as we could on our way to Beechwood Cemetery. We tried to get all the history straight in our minds, but there is just too much to comprehend. Beechwood Cemetery is on the same road that you turn to go to Lost Valley. You turn at Lost Valley and then take the first right-hand road to Beechwood. What a beautiful spot for a cemetery. You look across the valley to the Buffalo River. Big oak trees are blowing in the wind. You feel the peace and stillness. The pictures I took just can't get the feelings. Willard first showed us some of his ancestors and their burial plot. I enjoyed hearing who they were and how they were related to him. But Willard knew where N. Tim was buried, and I couldn't wait. And then there it was right in the middle on the southeast side, a little rock that had N. Tim written on it. I felt like something grabbed my heart. My heart says .L his story. In the early 17th century, Hezekiah and Elizabeth Betsy Penn Villains came to Boxley Valley. They brought their slave Aunt Piety with them. She had been given to Elizabeth as a wedding present. They settled in the valley close to where the Paul Villains family lives today. There is an old store still standing, built in 1920 by Ezekiel and Minnie Edgman. Up in the pasture is the grave of Aunt Piety. Apparently Betsy died before Aunt Piety. It seems that Betsy loved Aunt Piety, so she had directed her survivors to have her tombstone epitaph as if it was straight from the heart. It reads, "Not lost, blessed thought, but gone before, where we shall meet to part no more." The U.S. National Park Service erected a nice monument for Aunt Piety. You can view it from the road on the hill across from the old store. In researching our project, I found the book Old Folks Talking by Jim Lyles to be very helpful with many background facts that follow. Arkansas seceded from the Union and became a Confederate state on May 5, 1861. Then about 80% of the Arkansas men fought for the Confederacy, while 20% fought for the Union. In Newton County, the percentage was nearly reversed, with a reported 75% of the men enlisted for the Union side. Our findings were very enlightening. There appeared to be a communal interdependence in the mid to late 1800s that overrode social prejudices. In that regard, Newton County isolated communal living was the reverse of the social conflicts that were the norm in that time period. As stated in book, 3 decades of settlement had rapidly transformed the Buffalo Valley from wilderness to community and cultural landscape, a place settled by many folks within a short span of time. A relatively prosperous valley blessed with fertile farmland and imbued with an elaborate kinship structure, where most everybody was related by blood or marriage to everybody else. The very isolation of the valley fostered in its early settlers and their descendants an admirable degree of self-sufficiency, as well as a communal interdependence. An isolated, fiercely independent people, they differed throughout the southern Appalachian Mountains. Because they operated small, relatively autonomous farms, the average in 1850 was 28 improved acres per farm, and did not concentrate on a single cash crop. They had little need for slaves. Yet in 1860 there were 378 black slaves scattered throughout the Buffalo River watershed and its immediate area. The black population within the 3 county regions, while it consisted largely of slaves, also contained a significant proportion of free blacks. The region, and least of all the valley, had no economic ties to the Greater South. Its inhabitants were little affected by the social, economic, and political forces beyond the confines of their little valley. But those forces were shaping a civil war, and all, men, women, and children, were to be drawn into the vortex of that building storm. Our focus is on the remembrance and gravestone of Timothy Villens, nicknamed N. Tim. Additional background facts from the book Old Folks Talking by Jim Lyles. His mother, Valissa Aunt Piety Villens, was a wedding present to Betsy Villens back in North Carolina, CA, 1825, when they both were girls. She moved with the Villens family to the Buffalo River Valley in 1838. Betsy lost her husband to tuberculosis within 6 years after arriving in the Buffalo River Valley. She carried on with the help of her sons and daughters and Aunt Piety. Betsy and Aunt Piety had an agreement they would take care of each other until death. When Betsy became feeble and senile, Aunt Piety took care of her until her death out of love and the promise. In an irony, there was a well-finished gravestone for Piety when she died in 1884, but no stone was ever found for Betsy. Again stated in the book, Big Timothy Villens, nicknamed N. Villens by his white friends, Tim was the youngest of the sons of Valissa Piety Villens and the only one to live out his life in the valley. Piety's 3 sons were believed fathered years before the Civil War by a slave named Roland. Born in the valley around 1849, Tim may have been considered more a friend than slave to the several similarly aged children of Betsy Villens. Perhaps the influence of the several Villens families in Big Buffalo Valley helped ensure Tim's acceptance into the community for the duration of his long life. One story passed down through 100 years following the Civil War suggests how Tim may have secured a safe niche in the valley at an early age. My grandfather, Samuel Edgman, during the Civil War lived on what is now called the Duty Place. His house was burned and his stock was burned and his stock driven away on 2 different occasions. Once he was caught and held prisoner in the John Murphy house just north of his place. The Murphys had gone over near Huntsville, where they were better protected by the Union Army, which had come south to Fayetteville. The bushwhackers who held them prisoners were part of the notorious Hildebrand outlaws who operated in South Missouri and North Arkansas. This time they were holding the men for ransom or for whatever they could get from them, and then they would shoot them. They took 3 of the men up the hollow just south of the house and shot them. My grandmother, her mother, Aunt Jane Casey, and one of the Whiteley women buried them there. Grandmother took us years ago and showed us where they buried them. She said they had no coffins, not even a blanket to wrap them in, but they did fill the graves with leaves and covered them. She did not know any of them. One was partly clothed in uniform, and we believe, she said, Confederate. In the meantime, Aunt Piety, Negro, put her boy Timothy on a mule and sent him to where the old gentleman John Murphy was living for help. Mr. Murphy sent some of his young boys and some of the Penn boys and got in touch with the Union Army Patrol, which was operating nearby. I have no record of the other men rescued there than my grandfather, nor the number of men captured, nor the casualties in the fight, except James Murphy, who was shot through the hips and out of his saddle. His younger brother dragged him to safety. James Murphy went through life under a handicap of having to walk in a stoop position. I am telling this to show why the Murphys were held so highly by my mother's people, even though they saw the Civil War in a different light, and why the Negro boy, Timothy Villens, was welcome in the homes of at least the older ones. He was only 13 or 14 years old when he made the ride. Some men took his mule away from him at Dry Fork, and he went afoot the rest of the way to John Murphy's. Yet some people don't understand why this Negro was welcome in the homes. Following the war between the states, the transition from family property to freedom was certainly precarious for blacks in most any southern community. In Arkansas's Big Buffalo Valley, there was potential for that transition being a mighty lonely one for Tim Villens, 16 years old, when the Civil War's conclusion effectively ended slavery. With no companion, peer, leader, or father of his race to whom to look for guidance and support, Tim must have been torn between freedom and continuing to serve Betsy. Apparently, he wasted no time in establishing himself as a man, not only a freeman, but a man of worth. By 1880, the agricultural census for Newton County reported that Tim Villens was wrestling an admirable amount of production. Big Tim must have been a hard-working man. For a number of years, he evidently managed farm with no help except perhaps from his mother, then in her 60s. In order to achieve the production indicated on the 1,880 agricultural census, Tim Billings must have been farming the most arable lands. Sometime after 1880s, Tim brought Nancy, a local lady friend, to meet his mother, whereupon Aunt Piety is said to have exclaimed, "Lord, son, you've done gone and taken up with that poor white trash." Imagine a young black man taking up with a white woman in the post-Civil War South, regardless of her social status, and getting away with it. Tim did so. The saga of the Valley's fabled black man continued well into the new century. Family history indicates that Tim's first wife, Nancy, died around 1888, perhaps in childbirth, when their son Johnny was born. Oral history tells that Tim took a second wife, a younger woman, again, a local white family. Living with Timothy Billings in 1910 were Johnny, 21, William, 15, Timmy, 14, Louis, 13, Sarah, 9, Jesse, 6, 5, and Alice, 3. That such a family from interracial lines was apparently surviving nicely in the turn-of-the-century Ozarks backwoods of Arkansas is something that could not have happened in that place and time. And in such a close-knit, homogeneous society without the tacit consent of the whole community, nothing in the oral or written history contradicts the perception of peaceful coexistence, at least through Tim's lifetime. Tim's first wife and 2 babies were buried beside his mother Piety on a hill above the Hesvillians farmstead. Oral history informs us that Tim was interred near second wife Rosetta and 2 sons, John and Willie, in Beechwood Cemetery. 5.